Very good. Okay. Right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. For those here and for those watching, tonight is an informational session around one of the town meeting warrant articles, Article 17, which concerns the proposal to pass what's known as the Specialized Stretch Code for Massachusetts, an update to the building codes for energy efficiency. We'll hear all about the details of that here in a couple of minutes. I'm Carl Nyland with the Select Board, also a member of the Climate Resiliency Committee. And what we're planning tonight is, number one, to get everybody here introduced so you know who's here up on the panel, and then to have folks from the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources walk us through a presentation on what the Specialized Stretch Code is all about, and then to be available to answer questions for anyone that has any. So that's our agenda for this evening. So why don't we start with the rest of the introductions.
Okay, I'm Mike Johnson. I'm the chair of the Climate Resiliency Committee here in the town.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael Rossi. I'm an energy code specialist with Performance Systems Development.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Patel. I am with the Green Communities Division of the Department of Energy Resources.
So, Dylan, do you, before this isn't a board meeting, so it's just an informational session, so we don't need to go through the normal public meeting logistics. So we're just going to step right into the presentation. And I think, Dylan, will turn it over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carl. So, yeah, I'm Dylan. I'm joined with Michael Rossi from PSD to give a little bit more information on the Specialized Stretch Code. I'm going to present a pretty high-level policy overview of what it means and what it means for the town of Ipswich. And then I'll hand it over to Mike to give a little bit more on what the code actually entails in terms of construction. So, as you see on the screen, we kind of start off with the Climate Act that was passed in 2021 under the Baker administration. It did two things. Well, it did many things, but for the purposes of tonight, it created a legal mandate for the state to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and also set interim targets for each decade preceding. The second thing that it did was actually create legal authority for the Specialized Stretch Code and instructed the Department of Energy Resources to implement the regulations surrounding the Specialized Stretch Code and move the development of the regular stretch code, to which Ipswich is a party to, from the Bureau of Buildings, Regulations and Standards, BBRS, the Board of Buildings and Regulations and Standards, to the Department of Energy Resources. So we're kind of focusing on buildings here for two reasons. One, right now it actually contributes a lot to the state's carbon emissions. And we're also focusing on new buildings with the Specialized Stretch Code. You'll hear that quite often tonight. And that's because we are expecting quite considerable growth in the state, in the Commonwealth, up until 2050, upwards of a quarter of buildings that will be built by 2050, that will exist by 2050, will be new construction. And it's much easier to target that segment of the building stock than it is to do existing buildings. And there's already a plethora of policy drivers for existing buildings, again, supplemented by the federal government. However, it's much more cost effective to make new buildings as energy efficient as possible, and also to create the energy systems, the electrical systems that do promote clean electrification as technology develops. And we're pairing building electrification with the much larger grid electrification and clean energy that's coming online to the grid within the next few decades. So right now, the state is pretty fossil heavy. We do have a lot of natural gas that kind of provides the bulk of the grid. And right now, it is pretty carbon intensive to heat a house with electricity. That said, even though this is 2020, but and in just 4 short years, we've made pretty good progress, and we are expecting much bigger progress to happen. In the short, medium, and long term, we've already had some pretty good news with offshore wind. We've also got the great news last week about solar for all. So we are seeing a lot of policy drivers that are developing renewable energy even within the next few years, and I'm hopeful within the next few decades as well. But right now, it's actually less carbon intensive to heat a home with gas than it is with electric resistance, just because resistance heating, like we have here, uses a lot of electricity, and that electricity, as I've said, comes from fossil fuel sources like natural gas, a little bit of coal. But even so, when we're thinking about new homes with heat pumps, because heat pumps actually use a lot less electricity than with a resistance heater, they are, an air source heat pump is between 2.5 and 3.5 times more efficient. A ground source heat pump can be upwards of 5 or 6 times more efficient than a resistance heater. It uses much less, or it kind of generates much less grid emissions than you would from natural gas. And we can take that advantage and really supercharge that as the grid gets greener. So in 2050, in 25 years, with all of the renewables coming online, even with electric resistance heating, it's going to use or generate half as much carbon emissions than you would with natural gas. And with different kinds of heat pumps, whether it's air source or ground source, it's basically negligible. And so we can use that. We can expand the usage of heat pumps to be able to achieve our net zero greenhouse gas emissions targets. One of the great things about the specialized stretch code is not just how it will help achieve the Commonwealth's climate goals, it also provides a lot of financial benefits for towns and communities like Ipswich. So Ipswich, as you may know, is already a green community. As part of being a green community, it abides by 5 criteria, one of which is adhering to the regular stretch code. We have announced late last year a new grant program called Climate Leaders, which is basically a Green Communities 2.0. Green communities won't go away, our program won't go away. It's just another tier for grant opportunities. And so you'll see on the right that there are 5 different criteria to become a climate leader, one of which is to adopt the specialized stretch code. And that will enable the town of Ipswich, along with the 4 other criteria, to have access to grants for municipal electrification, enhanced grants for on-site renewable energy and storage, for geothermal, for outreach, and any other kinds of innovative projects. And I just want to point out that being a green community, Ipswich, I needed to update that. It has received over 500. More exact is about 567,000 last time I checked in DOER funding, of which there was we did award a grant of 167,000 late last year. We're working with your energy manager, Rick Mitchell, to adopt that for things, to implement that for things like weatherization, for electric vehicle, and for LEDs for the middle high school. So that's what's going on right now. And with the adoption of the specialized stretch code, there is a potential for other grant opportunities. And so where the specialized stretch code kind of sits right now is it's the apex of existing codes. There's the base code of which 50 municipalities adhere to. These are mostly smaller towns, towns that do not wish to become green communities, and towns that are part of municipal-like districts, for which we've recently changed regulations for that. So and that's actually falling with each passing year. Then there's the stretch code, of which Ipswich, as I've mentioned, is party to, and the specialized stretch code, which is basically the stretch code and a few additional amendments, which or additions that Mike will get to in a little bit. So far, we've had 34. Actually, it might be 35 as of Monday. I'm just going to show a map. Okay, yeah, this is not the updated one. So it's the map shows the adoptees of the stretch code, which is the kind of faded blue color. The ones in the darker blue with the yellow highlight show the specialized code adoptees. I want to add that the City Council for Newburyport actually voted in favor in their third reading on Monday. I think it just has to go to the mayor for formal adoption. And as we speak, actually, the town of Ashland is voting on it right now. So this is like constantly changing. We can barely keep up. And I believe by the time that town meeting is happening in Ipswich, there will be several others that are adopting it. So this is a constantly evolving map, and we are hoping that, Ipswich will be one of them. And I can tell you that one of your neighbors, Boxford, is also planning on voting on it this May as well. So that's kind of where we sit on the policy agenda. I'm going to pass it over to Mike on what the specialized stretch code actually means for buildings.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dylan. So my name is Michael Rossi. I'm an energy code specialist with PSD, as I mentioned. We are the lead training provider on behalf of the Mass Save Energy Code Technical Support Program. I have background as a HERS rater. I worked as a HERS rater in Massachusetts for about 2.5 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific provisions that are required as part of this opt-in specialized code.
Mike, can I just suggest you might explain what a HERS rater is?
Yes, we do have a slide in the document that goes to that into more detail, so I will cover that as well. So first, I just want to start with some quick facts about the specialized code. So the specialized code requirements will apply only to new construction. It has no impact on existing buildings or historic homes. There are no additional requirements under the specialized code if the building from the start chooses to go all electric, meaning there's no combustion equipment used in the home for space heating, water heating, clothes drying, or cooking. And it does retain the choice to build with natural gas. And typically, a home that follows the specialized code will be cheaper to build and operate in a new electric house when compared to the base code. And it provides forward-thinking and future-proofing measures because it makes new buildings really as efficient as possible. And it also saves future homeowners money if they want to convert their house to all electric in the future. And we'll get to why in a couple minutes, but essentially there are requirements relating to pre-wiring, which means installing an electric plug, like an electric outlet, similar to those you might find for a dryer, near any of the equipment that's currently using fossil fuels, and that's only required for the mixed fuel pathway. And so when doing some of those measures like pre-wiring there, what you're doing is making the change up front and getting that provision in place instead of having to do it 5 years down the line when you want to do a retrofit to add an electric stove or something like that. It's cheaper to do initially instead of later, and that's sort of when it gets into some of the future proving specific stuff. And we'll cover this in more detail, so I just wanted to touch on that. There's no requirements that are different than the current stretch code for electric vehicle wiring. And as Dylan mentioned, it does offer some opportunities for funding for municipalities and schools through that Climate Leaders program that's available. And it also just keeps money in Ipswich. It really focuses on the local community without having to go elsewhere to do that. So, All right, so we talked about HERS ratings, and I want to dig in a little bit more detail to explain what it is and what it means. So a HERS rater is essentially a third-party verifier that looks at the energy features of a home. And the way I like to describe a HERS rating is like a miles per gallon sticker for a car, but for a house. The HERS acronym is Home Energy Rating System, and the HERS score is on that right column there. It gives a sense of what the HERS index is. So again, third-party certification program through the Residential Energy Services Network. And any home can have a HERS rating. Existing homes typically fall under about like a HERS 140. HERS 100 is equivalent to a new home that was constructed in 2006. And the requirements in the Mass Code do bring it down to a 42 for both the stretch code and the specialized code. And in Massachusetts in 2021 and 2022, the average was about a HERS 51. And a zero energy home would be considered a HERS 0 or lower. You can actually have negative scores as well. So this chart right here gives a good sense of where the requirements have differed between the different code versions. The base code is the bar graph in gray. The blue represents the stretch code, and the green represents the specialized code. So one of the big things you'll notice here is that in 2024, in July, the stretch code requirement drops from a 52 to a 42. And that is actually the same as the requirement for the opt-in code. So when it comes to the HERS score that would be required, there's not really going to be a difference in the HERS index, but I want to talk a little bit about what it was just to lay the foundation of what we'll be discussing in more detail further in the presentation. Yep.
Some people might not understand what the different components are that make up the HERS rating. Are you going to be talking about that?
I wasn't planning to, but I can just briefly mention it. So what you look at is a lot of different features of the home and just take a pretty comprehensive look at it, similar to what you do for a miles per gallon sticker for a car. You look at the airtightness of the thermal envelope, so you measure it with equipment. You look at the duct leakage, how much air is leaking through the duct systems. You look at the efficiency of the ventilation system that was installed. And you also collect data on different aspects of the home. So that's including like model numbers for different washers and dryers, different equipment and appliances, refrigerators, things like that, as well as information relating to the mechanical systems. And the other big thing is it's just an energy model. So you build a 3D model based on the different components of the home. So you also look at the insulation features, mechanical, solar, and it all gets factored in, and that sort of gets that score that's provided in the end. So it really is a pretty comprehensive look at the building, but it doesn't factor in occupant use. And I think that's something we want to just clarify too, is that the HERS requirements are only like how it would be likely to perform. It doesn't go into specifics relating to what occupant behavior might be like. So, yeah.
Can I also just, go ahead, point. Thank you for the question. We welcome all questions. But if you wouldn't mind, because we're being recorded, if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, just stepping to the microphone over here so we can make sure that everybody watching hears the question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if that wasn't documented before, the question was, what are the components of a HERS rating and what's in it? So that's just for the audience. Great. So here's a little bit more detail about the requirements of the code. So as I noted, if you're building an all-electric new home of any size, the requirement of the specialized code is going to be the exact same as it would be under the stretch code. And that would be a HERS 45 or a passive house path, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in the presentation. But if there's a mixed fuel home, and what that means is any combustion equipment installed or piping for combustion equipment, if it's under 4,000 square feet, the stretch code requires a minimum of a HERS, or a maximum of a HERS 42. But the specialized code does add on a couple additional requirements, which include adding a solar photovoltaic system with a minimum of 4 kilowatts, as well as wiring for electrification, which is what I talked about a little bit briefly earlier. There are additional requirements for homes that are over 4,000 square feet, which are typically larger luxury homes. And essentially, if you want to be mixed fuel with that pathway, you have to have enough to achieve a HERS 0 or a FIAS 0, which is the passive house standard. And For a little bit more about Passive House, it's a third-party certification system similar to hers. There's two standards. There's an American version, which is Passive. It was formerly Passive House Institute US, but now it goes by FIAS. And there's PHI, which is Passive House Institute, which is more the European standard. And either of those options are available for when you're going to Passive House. But in order to achieve the requirements for this, homes over 4,000 square feet will have to, if they want to use any fossil fuel equipment, will have to have enough solar PV on the site to get it to a net zero, as well as that wiring for electrification. And if any home is going with a Passive House option, there are going to be those additional measures for the wiring, but no solar requirement there. And then, just as noted, the home alterations and additions are going to have the same requirements as they would under the stretch code. And for historic or existing homes, the energy code is exempt if it's shown by a registered, someone from the Historical Preservation Committee that it would damage the historic fabric or function of the building. All right, so as noted, I want to talk a little bit about what the requirements would be for that solar PV system for those following the mixed fuel path. So for mixed fuel buildings, solar is required when there's a suitable solar zone of at least 300 square feet or greater. And the system can be ground mounted as long as it's still on site. And for all electric buildings, as noted, solar is not required, but there are some requirements for solar readiness, which is essentially having information on the construction documents that can prepare you for the future installation of a solar system, so that if someone's to install a system in the future, they have what they need to route the information. So just to reiterate, all electric home, no requirement for solar. If it goes the Passive House route, there's also no requirement for solar. If it's a mixed fuel home that's under 4,000 square feet, there is a requirement for at least a 4 kilowatt array. And if it's a mixed fuel home that's over 4,000 square feet, which again are typically those larger luxury homes, it has to have enough for net zero, which is typically an array of 8 kilowatts or greater, just depending on the project specific stuff. And then for other residential buildings that don't fall under the requirements of the specialized or requirements of the residential code and are more likely to follow the commercial requirements, there's the requirement of 0.75 watts per square foot, which is the same type of requirement as you would for the commercial solar requirements.
Okay, so I think that is actually our presentation, the totality of it. We do have additional slides on multifamily and commercial, but just we put that in the appendix just because of we figured a focus on single-family residential would be more relevant for Ipswich. However, we can delve into that for any questions, or we can talk about and discuss any other questions that the audience might have. And if you don't mind just going up to the podium for that.
Dylan, can I ask you one question to start?
Sure.
What could either of you say about any cost analysis of, you touched on this a little bit, but the cost upfront as compared to the operational cost savings associated with building to the specialized stretch code?
So there is no cost because, as Mike had mentioned, there's no difference between building an all-electric home to the current stretch code versus the specialized stretch code. Then, with no additional requirements, there's no additional cost. With a mixed fuel house, because you have to do the pre-wiring and the solar, then obviously there is an added construction cost to that. The solar does not have to be bought or financed by the homeowner. You can use like a third-party lease, a PPA agreement, so that cost is spread out over time, but you're still getting those savings. And then the whole point of the pre-wiring is that even though it's an additional upfront cost, for any future homeowner, or if you do decide to switch out an appliance later in your life, that will save you money because you don't have to get a contractor in to put in, or an electrician to do that wiring after the building has been built. In terms of operational costs, because Ipswich is an MLP, you do benefit from low electricity rates. So that definitely helps with driving down the cost of operating an electrified building. And I think that's as much as I can say about the cost. We've spoken to a lot of builders with this topic, and we're well aware that right now it's the macroeconomic environment is not great. We are cognizant of the fact that there's high inflation, that the cost of construction materials is quite high, there are supply chain issues, and so I think we have to think about how buildings are being built in the medium to long term, and not just in 2024, 2025, 2026. This is going to be affecting development up until 2050 and beyond. Buildings last for what, 50, 70, 100 years. And even by the time that this would be effective in Ipswich, I'm cautiously hopeful, that we might see interest rates and inflation start to drop.
Question?
Yes, thank you. Do I need to state my name and address?
You can. You don't have to, but you can.
Jenny Connolly, 8 Linden Street. So if I may, I have a question on 2 slides.
Mm-hmm.
The fast facts.
Yep.
Okay. Can these be guaranteed that they're not going to change?
So the specialized stretch code, and the stretch code does get updated every 3 years. I don't know what it's going to be like in 2030 or 2040, but I'm very optimistic. I can give you a pretty good level of confidence that the specialized stretch code won't affect existing buildings. We have been getting feedback from many people about what the current stretch code requirements are doing on existing buildings, and we hear that. And I think that applying any additional specialized code requirements on existing buildings is premature at this time, and I don't think it's within the conversation in DOER. I think with the choice to build natural gas, I don't think that will be a code question. I think that's actually a state policy question. I think the state is moving away from natural gas, and I think the code will have to follow what is in any future law. I don't think DOER will just unilaterally ban gas without any direction from the legislature. And the EV wiring requirements also, I think, is quite sufficient when it comes to the stretch code requirements, and so I don't think it's necessary for any additional requirements to be on the specialized stretch code.
Okay, so
Yeah, and sorry, I just want to clarify one note that Dylan made too. The reason why it gets updated every 3 years is because that is in line with the cycle of adoption for the national model code that the stretch code and opt-in code are based on, which is the 2021 version of the International Energy Conservation Code, which is developed through the International Code Council. So typically, these are like, when it said that it's updated every 3 years, a lot of it's more just to align with the latest version of the code that's available that the state follows. And also just the municipal opt-in specialized code was available for adoption starting in January of 2023. Yeah. So because of that, it still hasn't been around long enough for that for it to be considered change, because it is so new as a option. Yeah.
And Massachusetts is not the only one that does that 3-year cycle. It's
that's consistent across
almost every other state does that.
Yeah, there are some municipalities that there are some states that adopt it at the code at the municipal level, but in New England, it's all adopted at the state level. And then in Mass Pacific, we have the stretch and opt-in opportunities to go above and beyond what's in that model code.
I'd like to just add one thing, if you don't mind. So there's been quite a bit of discussion about future changes in the building code, and I'd like to just clarify that all building codes change every 3 or 4 years or so. Even with the base code, there's changes. In fact, since in the last 10 years, the base code has been changed 10 times, or excuse me, 6 times in the last 10 years. So, you know, there's some concern that we're locked into future changes in the stretch code or the specialized stretch code, but that's going to happen even with the base code, and we've seen evidence of that historically, that the base code changes as well. And it's all for things like energy efficiency, safety, you know, those kind of building technology and those kind of things. So it's a good thing that building codes change. We want them to change with technology and safety.
Okay. So just to be clear, these can't be guaranteed that they're going to stay this way. I just want to make that a simple answer. Is that right? These can't be, it says fast facts, but these could change, as you're saying. Like, I know you're hopeful, which is great, but the reality is these could change.
They could change in 2030, 2040, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you opt in, there's always the possibility to opt out.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what's next. The stretch code versus specialized stretch code, if that could be brought up, please. Okay. The bottom one, what does it say? Historic or existing homes. It says energy code exception if would damage the historic fabric of the building. But it says existing homes.
Sorry, that's a typo. That should just say historic homes.
Okay. I just want to be clear because I didn't think it was existing homes, so I just, that's good.
No, I apologize for that.
That's good. No, that's good. Anybody else? I don't want to take the whole. So solar panels for those who are mixed use, it's based on feasibility.
Yes. So sorry, go ahead.
No, my question is, how is that determined and who determines that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a provision of the code itself. In the residential side, that would be done in Appendix RB of the energy code, as well as Appendix CB on the commercial side. And that part of the code in the stretch code does have the specific requirements relating to that solar readiness that you have to do. There are exceptions to the solar readiness requirements, and that's if you can't have the applicable space for a solar-ready zone. There are also exceptions if it's shaded for more than 70% of daylight hours annually. So the requirements aren't, and I think there is also a required orientation. I think it's, I have to look at the code exactly to get you a specific answer on
anything
that.
That's not north-facing. Anything that is north-facing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are orientation requirements for that zone. And all of that information is laid out in that in the appendix there, RB and CB, and I can read those for you if that'd be helpful as well.
But yeah, essentially it's your building inspector
that
will make those determinations.
And there's like specific things that, not just,
it's quite prescriptive and
okay, that's good.
Yeah, there's very little that's in the way that's discretionary.
Okay, that's good.
But one thing, you don't have to cut down trees.
Yes.
If there are trees, you don't have to cut them down.
Right.
Cut them down.
Yeah, we get that a lot, but that's not a requirement.
That one. That one. I think I might be done. Wait. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm Susan Thorne from 2 Charlotte Road, and I had an easy question first, which is, how do we access the recording of the presentation? It was terrific, but it went by really fast.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It will be on the ICAM website.
Okay.
So you just go into the website and it'll have the listing for the different presentations and recordings, and you can pull it there.
Okay, great. I had a couple other questions relative to the slides. When you talked about a PPA, that's something that may not be familiar to other people. And I wondered if you could just describe that a little bit.
Yeah, so there are different options for getting solar PV on your roof. You can buy it or finance it outright, or you can get what's known as a power purchase agreement, and that's where a third-party installer will put up the capital for you, put it on your roof, and essentially you would be paying it back through the difference. This is where it gets a little bit complicated. The difference between the rate that you're paying to ELD and what gets credited from your net metering credits. I don't know if ELD has a different policy or schedule when it comes to net metering credits, but essentially most of those net metering credits will probably go to that third-party supplier, but you might retain a percentage of that, so you're still seeing some savings.
Yeah.
But it's a good option if you don't want to front that capital up front. And also, in the PPA agreement, the power purchase agreement, since it's owned by the third-party installer, it's usually maintained by them as well. Not that solar needs maintenance, maybe like an inverter needs to be changed or something like that, but it's essentially a contract.
So you're signing a contract with someone who will provide the panels to your project. They'll come, they'll install them, they'll maintain them, and you give them a little cut on the savings that you get
Exactly.
on your electric bill.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great. Okay.
And some great news that came out last week was the Biden-Harris announcement from the Inflation Reduction Act. They're dedicating several $100 million. I think it's $165 million, but it might be more, in Solar for All. And what Solar for All is, it's distribution across all of the states. Massachusetts gets a cut, and essentially that provides DOER with funding that we can give to low-income residents so that they can either purchase solar at a substantially reduced amount, or they can have access to those third-party options with a greater amount of savings that might be available to them.
Okay,
or
thank
access
you.
to community solar.
Okay. Another question about the Green Communities program. You said that it's introducing a new tier of programs that would be available to those communities that adopt the specialized stretch code. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so when we looked at the map of Massachusetts, we could see that almost all of the towns in the state have adopted the stretch code, but only the darker ones with the yellow borders are the ones who would be eligible for those grants.
Right now, yeah. Well, so I want to repeat that we introduced this. We introduced Climate Leaders, or we launched it like last October. And we don't have any Climate Leaders yet because we're still in the implementation phase.
I see.
We
Okay.
have about between 20 and 30 interested parties, and this will be a rolling thing. So just like with Green Communities designation, we grow every year. In fact, we actually had 4 new Green Communities announced last week. You know, whether Ipswich does vote on this in May or like next year, or whether it's still, you know, trying to work on the other criteria, it'll always have the opportunity to join Climate Leaders when it's ready.
Okay.
That door will always be open.
But the door won't open for Ipswich until we adopt the specialized stretch code.
And the other criteria, yeah.
Okay. And what? So essentially, we as a town that could adopt the specialized stretch code, if we were to do that, we would be in a small pool of eligible communities that could take advantage of the specialized grants.
Exactly, yeah. So there is a first mover advantage to this. I don't want to give away too many numbers. Like, we do have the financing to kind of, no matter what size, but obviously the more applicants there are, the smaller that will be, just like the smaller that pot will be shared.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is definitely a first mover advantage.
We get a bigger piece of the pie.
But yeah, I think, you know, within the first 3 years, at least within the short term, Ipswich does have plenty of opportunities available for it.
Okay.
So yeah, there's no rush in getting there this July, but I think, you know, coming in next year or in the end of the year will definitely reap benefits to the town.
Okay, thank you.
Just like to add one thing to what Dylan was saying about the climate leaders criteria. Other than the specialized stretch code, which we're trying to adopt now, the town of Ipswich municipal government has already accomplished most, if not all, of the other requirements. So we already have we're in the process of a zero EV first vehicle policy. We have a municipal decarbonization roadmap. We have a municipal decarbonization commitment, which is the zero carbon resolution. So most of those things we have already done. The only one that's still remaining in order to be a climate leader would be the specialized stretch code adoption.
Can I ask Dylan, do you have any, I think you don't yet have a sense of what additional funding opportunities may be available, but do you have any sense of when those decisions will be made?
Yeah, I've been under orders not to give away funding amounts. So we do have the financing mechanism for it, but we're still kind of tallying over those numbers. And those should be ready like come July, I imagine, or at least within the next few months. Essentially, Green Communities offers a maximum of $225,000 per year. We're expecting climate leaders to be just more than that, depending on the project. So something like outreach, community engagement and outreach is generally a small cost item. Something like a geothermal system for a building can run into the millions of dollars. So I think it will be something that scales to the cost of the project. So with geothermal, for example, it could be like 500, maybe up to $1 million. With the on-site solar, it could be a few $100,000, but I can't give away exact numbers right now.
Yeah, I actually also just want to offer a correction on something I said earlier, and that addresses the woman's question just a minute ago. When I talked about the solar readiness requirements, I was referencing the requirements under the stretch code. I wasn't sure if you were referring to those requirements or those. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so when you said the solar readiness, I wasn't sure if you were referring to the requirements under the stretch code or for the requirement for that solar zone under the specialized code for the mixed fuel pathway.
It was specialized stretch code.
Yeah, so I just wanted to offer a quick clarification on that. So I was giving you what it would be for the solar readiness provisions, which are part of the stretch code. But with the specialized code, there is a different section I want to reference. It's section RC 105.1, which has the requirements that are outlined for the solar roof zone. So instead of referencing Appendix RB and CB, the specific requirements, and this only applies to those new homes constructed under the mixed fuel pathway, to follow section RC 105, which has some of the specific requirements for the solar roof zone. And most of what I said was the same. So if it's shaded for more than 70% of daylight hours annually, it's still exempt. But this gives the requirements for the installation of the solar system rather than the solar readiness, which I just talked about.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Hi.
Hi. Kate Elliott, 273 Argilla Road. I'm not sure if Carl or Mike knows. Do you know how long we've been a Green Communities member? I was thinking 2019?
2018.
2018? Okay. So I just wanted, maybe not tonight, but at some point double check our math, because I think we have accessed much more than $566,000 from the Green Communities program. Because if Dylan said that we could access up to $225,000 a year, and we've been a member for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
right.
It's not automatic.
Right.
You have to apply for a grant. So I'm trying to remember my history. So when Ipswich got designated back in 2018, you received a designation grant, which which would have been like around 200,000.
Okay.
And then once that was done, you received a competitive grant, which I think was another 200,000, just by coincidence. Those projects need to be completed before Ipswich is eligible to apply for another grant. So you don't get them automatically every year.
Okay.
They have to be like separate grant awards. So one has to close before another can kind of be open.
Yeah, and we just did a recent inventory of the grants.
Okay.
So we do have a current number.
Okay. Oh, no, that makes sense.
yeah.
I wanted to make sure that it wasn't more than that, because I know just looking back at the capital plan the last few years, we've had a lot of things designated for green communities.
Yes. Yeah, I think
Wanna
maybe
make
more
sure that
things
those-
designated than actually ended up
happen.
it being,
Okay,
it was
that
used
makes
for.
Okay, thank you. Did you have another? I had one more question, yeah. So if a municipality were to follow the base building code, it could not be a green community
Exactly.
member,
That's correct.
correct? So we would lose access to that
Yeah.
fund, which we have used to supplement our capital budget over the last few years. So that, I just want to make that clear that we would lose that
Yeah,
designation.
so correct. So the towns of Essex and Rochester are no longer green communities.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And actually, sorry, that was not related to your question, but something I forgot to mention in the slide. So MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, also provides incentives for building both to the stretch code and to the specialized code. My understanding is that for any new school that's built to the stretch code gets a 2% incentive point on a reimbursement basis, and on the specialized code it's 3%. That 1% might not seem like a lot, but when you're talking about like a $30 million school project, $300,000 is a lot of money. So just want to put that out there as well.
Can I ask you about that, Dylan? Isn't it true, I don't know if this is a fact or just something that may happen, I thought it was true that MSBA has said they will not fund buildings that are built to less than the stretch code. I don't know if I said that right, but that's what I thought I understood, that they will be requiring buildings to be built at least to the stretch code going forward.
Going forward, I think that's correct. I've not looked at the most recent update, but I do know that there is that 3% incentive for the specialized.
Yeah, and I want to offer just a quick clarification on that too. So if you choose not to adopt the specialized code, you still don't lose your status as a green community. I know that's been a piece of information too, but I just want to make sure that's crystal clear as well. So it's only if you rescind the stretch code where you would lose that status. But if you don't adopt the specialized, the status stays in place.
Hi. Hello, Ken Savoy. My questions are more geared towards the, I guess, the practical, the building profession side of things. It appears that the specialized code is more geared towards allowing more grant money available, not so much changing the regulations as it is allowing more opportunities for grant money. Is that a correct kind of assessment in general?
It depends. Well, we give different presentations on this. So in the past, we've done builders forums where we would get together. There would be, within a specific town, we would invite builders within a community, and we would go a little bit more in depth. Like we would kind of skip over all of this policy stuff and go a little bit more in depth into the code, which I can speak with both Carl and Michael if that's an option for Ipswich. But for the purposes of this, we try to be a bit more even with both the policy, the financial side, and what the stretch specialized code actually means. Mm-hmm. So the selling point here is not just money. There's also the building practicalities of it, as you mentioned, and there's also I think the most overarching thing, the climate aspect, I think is the biggest sell.
Yeah. Sure. One other aspect I think is really important to remember is the consumer protection aspect of it for those that want to install equipment in the future but might not have the capacity to do so right up front. So it's something where it offers consumer protection, whereas like 5 years down the line for residents living in the home, they won't have to undergo a really expensive retrofit to wire for or pre-wire for adding equipment. It'll just be already ready there up front from when you start the project. So you can, if you have a gas stove when you buy the new home, if they for some reason leave the market in a couple of years, and there's more induction stoves available, you won't have to undergo the retrofit to get that new wire in place. It'll already be there from the start. So
Sure. Okay.
I always think about that too, where it's just cheaper to do upfront initially too, because you'll have the walls open during that new construction process, whereas years down the line you might have to poke holes and it's not as easy to retrofit. So the costs up front are typically a lot cheaper than it would be later on.
Did that answer your question, though, Ken? I'm not sure.
Well, generally, yes. I don't think it's changing the code significantly in terms of the requirements for construction as much as it is, as you say, maybe requiring pre-planning requirements.
Right. Yeah. I've heard it described as like plug and play to some degree, where you have all the wiring in place initially, so that if you were to add something, a new water heater, stove, heating system, or clothes dryer in the future that would use electricity, it's already ready to go, and all you have to do is plug it in.
Okay. I have another question. This is more from the standpoint of why not? Why are gut renovations, where you're taking a building down to the studs, removing all the interior finishes and insulation, not considered new construction and in terms of bringing it up to code? You're basically, from what I understand, considering that still an existing building. Why isn't that also considered under the requirements for new construction?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's kind of why that's why the latest stretch code did have that update. So I believe the 9th stretch code did have requirements for whole home renovations, and now the latest update now considers anything over. Well, there are different thresholds for renovations or additions with existing homes to be built to stretch code standards. The reason why that was why we did that was we got a lot of that loophole that, as you were saying, is that a lot of builders or developers would take everything down to the studs and just like rebuild the entire house, and it would still count as an existing home. So I think we partially took care of that with the stretch code. However, I think from a technical standpoint, we can't class that as a new construction, because I think the building inspector has the power to kind of issue that permit. So it would have to be a new construction permit, not a long form alteration.
All right. I'm not sure the building inspectors would necessarily make that determination. It seemed to me it would be more of a code requirement. That's just my general impression, and I'm not necessarily advocating for or against, but it does seem to make sense that when you're getting to that point of renovation, you should be considered new construction. Let me bring another question. This is
Can I just comment? I mean, one, at a practical level, correct me if this is not quite right, but you get some of the same effect with the HERS rating being the same for the specialized stretch code as for the stretch code. You have to meet the same standard, whether it's classified as new construction or not.
So
Right.
no,
With
that's
a gut
that's
renovation, it's
incorrect.
higher.
Yeah, so there's this HERS index. If you are to do a gut renovation, instead of a 42, it has to achieve a 52, 55, or
Yeah,
58.
right.
There's different standards for
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Which is still pretty
what
good.
that would be. Yep.
Yeah. So this is another point that I just want to raise out, that I get feedback from many clients. They're happy to put in electric heat pumps, heat their home with electricity, but they don't want to give up gas for cooking, and they don't want to give gas for fireplaces, which are very popular these days. And yet they're penalized for choosing those types of appliances, which are very minimal in terms of the consumption of gas generally. Why is that? Why can't we provide some flexibility on that instead of making it such a black and white situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Ellen, can I ask you, just because we get reminded all the time, can you lean into the microphone?
Sorry. I was getting a little bit too comfortable. So that's a really good question. I think that's something that we can definitely look into. I can't guarantee that it will change in the future, whether that flexibility will be added. When it comes to gas cooktops and gas fireplaces, it's also important to note that you're still paying for the standing charge, the delivery charge for that gas system. So I don't think those are minor modifications to a home. You still have to have that gas connection into the home if you want to make that conscious decision to do so. So I that's all I can say to that matter.
I think one of the problems, and I'm speculating here a bit, Ken, but one of the problems with that question, or the answer to your question, is it kind of gets into the use of those gas appliances, right? So you say, well, a gas stove or a gas fireplace doesn't use very much heat, BTUs, gas, but it all depends on how it's used too, right? Sure. So the person could decide to use that as their primary source of heating and turn the heat pump off. I'm not saying that it would make sense to do that, but that gets into the problem is how do you regulate those gas appliances if the objective is to decarbonize, if that's the goal, allowing existing gas appliances without to exempt them from the penalty, so to speak, gets into a problem with how do you regulate the use of those appliances, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, I understand. Which leads me to my final question. So we're doing a project in Arlington now where there's, like many communities, there's natural gas available in the street. Many of the homes are already heated by natural gas. The new homes now that want to be integrated into that community cannot tie into the gas without a penalty. What have you considered in terms of the impact on the home, the large number of existing homes that are relying on natural gas for their heat, in terms of how that's going to affect their operational costs long term? I mean, it would seem that it's going to have an impact on gas prices as time goes forward here, in terms of, because you're restricting gas so much now that so fewer homes will rely on gas, and those that are relying and can't afford to convert over to electricity because it just doesn't make sense economically. How is that almost fair to them, to the existing customers that have no choice, that have to rely on gas? And
that's a fantastic equity issue, and we're very cognizant of that in DOER. I do want to point out Arlington actually is a different tier. Arlington is part of the fossil fuel free demonstration program, and that's why new buildings aren't allowed to connect to natural gas. And that's only limited to 10 municipalities within the state. To your general question, I definitely agree. I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think DOER, and especially this administration, is committed to a just transition towards electrification. And what that means practically is that as more people move away from gas and the gas assets, the rate base becomes smaller, and that burden is increasingly shifted to those that are not on gas, as you're saying, we're trying to increase the incentives and increase the amount of support that is available for those lower income houses to either switch to electrification or to switch to what's known as non-gas alternatives. And I think we're going to be seeing that a lot throughout the rest of this decade and next decade with switches from natural gas systems to community geothermal systems. We're seeing that already in like Lowell, Boston, Framingham. It's expanding into 12 or 15 new sites. And I think, National Grid and Eversource is committed to, either switching to electrification or to switch to non-gas alternatives. And I think we're going to be seeing that a lot throughout the rest of this decade and next decade with switches from natural gas systems to community geothermal systems. We're seeing that already in like Lowell, Boston, Framingham. It's expanding into 15 or 12 or 15 new sites. And I think, National Grid and Eversource is committed using non-gas alternatives as a way of providing heat to those that and heat to those that are already served by natural gas. But for those that are kind of don't have that option, DOER is providing a massive amounts of rebates even for ELD. We're implementing later this year a supplement known as the Home Energy Rebate System, specifically for municipal light districts to supplement what they already have in terms of rebates, so that it does help lower income households to move towards electrification.
Yeah, and speaking specifically to Arlington too, just going back to the code side, what the communities that are in that 10 community fossil fuel free demonstration program, essentially what they do is they adopt the specialized code, but remove the mixed fuel pathway from the specialized code. So the buildings have to either be all electric or zero energy. So it's the same general code requirements, they just strike out the mixed fuel pathway.
The reason why it's a pilot is that we want to gather as much data as possible on what the experiences are of these 10 communities. We know that eventually the state will move away from fossil fuels, but I think this is a really good test case to see how it does work in practice and whether the kinds of issues that you are quite rightly mentioning do pop up and what can be done to alleviate them. So I completely get your concern. I think that we're taking steps to kind of see how that works out in practice.
Curious, how many communities are in the category of Arlington?
10. Well, technically 9. We're looking for a 10th one, and it's basically between Northampton and Somerville. But the fossil fuel-free demonstration program is only limited to 10 communities.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Matthew Cummings. I'm local, live down the street, Cummings Architects. I'm going to direct my questions to Mike, the HERS rater, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'm not a HERS rater.
Yep.
But we work with HERS raters all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Working with HERS raters before the stretch code came out.
Mm-hmm.
Do new houses all the time, pass like 20 points below what you require for new homes. The problem is the existing homes and historic homes. I heard you say earlier that historic homes are exempt. But they are, so long as you don't add an addition that's 1,000 square feet. So yeah, your head's going straight up and down. So you had 1,000 square feet. The problem is that that addition has to meet the criteria of a whole house that a HERS rater can HERS rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, that means your historic house has to be HERS rated. We have a house in Newbury, that is restricted by historic New England, which we wouldn't tear apart a historic house anyways. We'd like to add some square footage to it. It doesn't have a kitchen. That means it can't be HERS rated. So we're stuck. We can't add an addition on the historic house. There's a lot of historic houses, and you'd think 1,000 square feet is a lot, but that's simply maybe a 19 square foot addition that's 2 stories, and the second you insulate the basement and put your HVAC system in it, that accounts for about 1,100 square feet. So it's just a simple 19 square foot, 2-story addition with the basement. That's 1,000 square feet. So HERS raters cannot HERS rate additions. They can only HERS rate houses by their program and their license. So what DOA did is they decided, well, we'll allow people to HERS rate only additions. But the problem is HERS raters cannot HERS rate additions, which means it forces any addition over 1,000 square feet, and there's several other criteria that clicks this in, and it forces the HERS rater to as well HERS rate the whole home. We have several houses right now. I have no idea how they're going to pass. And they've just been recently renovated under the old, or just recent, the previous, energy code. And now we're talking about taking the windows and the insulation out. It's pretty tough for the existing homes. I know that you finally having dialogue with the with builders, building inspectors, architects, and so forth. Different than the BBRS, where there's a 6-month period for dialogue. You guys didn't do that. I hope that you would talk to us and let us have dialogue so that people can add additions to their homes and renovate their homes, especially the historical homes. Here's point of info. About 1/3 of the houses in Ipswich are older than 1840. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I appreciate your comments. And I want to note that I know DOER did host a listening session and had an opportunity to provide public comments up to April 3rd. I actually think I saw your comments that came in. So yeah,
Everyone was very professional in that meeting.
yeah, absolutely. So I was kind of surprised by that. I was expecting a little bit more contention.
We were definitely. I do realize this is being recorded, but we were expecting less comments. I am going to say on behalf of DOER that with the transition from BBRS to I will say that on behalf of DOER that the transition from BBRS to DOER was kind of rocky, to say the least. And I think that all of the comments that are coming from architects and builders are really welcome. If it's any consolation, I think our public dialogue our public relations, our dialogues, and our stakeholder engagement processes will develop over time. I don't think, and I'm going to take responsibility on behalf of DOER, that it has been that great in the past. But based on all of the feedback that we're getting so far, I think we are going to try and be a lot more open and a lot more transparent with regard to future code changes.
Dylan or Michael, could you speak a little bit more about the exemption for historical homes? So it says here on the slide that if it damages historical fabric of the building, can you talk a little bit more about what that means? If somebody who wanted to put an addition, but the whole building had to meet the HERS requirement, what are those? How would those exemptions work?
Yeah, so essentially any alteration or additions, and Mr. Cummings was correct that, as long as there's an addition is below 1,000 square feet, then that historic home would not need to comply with a HERS rating. But any addition below that or any interior renovation would not need to require a HERS compliance. If it's the state historic preservation officer, the local building inspector, or any historic commission signs off on the fact that it would alter or permanently damage the historic nature of that building. The only exception, I think, is that 1,000 square foot addition.
Yeah, and going back to the code for that, the section where you can find the provision relating to historic buildings is section C501.5, which is historic buildings. Provisions of this code relating to the construction, repair, alteration, restoration, and movement of structures and change of occupancy shall not be mandatory for historic buildings, provided that a report has been submitted for the code official and signed by the registered design professional or a representative of the State Historic Preservation Office or the Historic Preservation Authority having jurisdiction, demonstrating that compliance with the provision would threaten, degrade, or destroy the historic form, fabric, or function of the building. And that is a provision directly from the model code, the 2021 IECC, and not specific to Massachusetts. That was, so yeah, that's just one note there.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, again. If you could just clarify two, and then I have other questions, but two responses, one referring to Kate's question. You had added at the end of that answer, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that I guess the question was, do we remain a green community if we don't adopt the specialized stretch code? But then I think you added at the end, again, correct me if I'm wrong, if we don't adopt the specialized stretch code, we can still be considered a green community. It's only if we accept it and then leave it.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, so the article is to adopt the specialized stretch code. If you decide not to, you'll still be a green community. If you do, then you get one step closer to being a climate leader. If there was a decision for the town to to unadopt, for lack of a better word, the regular stretch code, to which Ipswich is already part of, then it would no longer be a green community. And I think what you're referring to, like in the future, there's always that opportunity to rescind. Thank you. The specialized stretch code if it's not a match for Ipswich.
But then we wouldn't be considered a green community.
You wouldn't be a climate leader, but you'd still be a green community.
If we rescinded it?
If you rescinded the special, if you adopt the specialized,
Yep.
and then rescind it in 2027,
Right. So we would still be considered a green community?
you'd still be
that's good
considered
to
a
know.
green community as long as you still have the stretch code.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's confusing, I know.
It's all confusing. And then the other question, I don't know who had it. The renovate, and this is I'm still learning. The renovations for homes going down to the studs, I think you were talking about, they'll have a higher threshold for the HERS ratings. And what is that, for people like me, what does that mean in terms of like what the homeowner will have to do if they do renovations? Like what else, how do they get,
Yeah.
what do they need to do to get to that?
That's a great question.
Can we
Yeah.
just to help, it's easy to get confused between the two versions of the code, but just to be clear, this example is a question about the stretch code.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
A good
Okay.
question.
Which we're
That's-
happy to answer.
Thank you.
Good question, but not about the
Thank you.
specialized stretch.
Okay, that's what I was, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so a couple things I want to note here. So from the code, for additions or alterations, just the requirements take effect for, the HERS requirements take effect for buildings that have exceeding 1,000 square feet or exceeding 100% of the existing conditioned floor area, shall comply with the requirements for existing buildings. And when we say higher score, what that means is less stringent than what would be required for new construction. So obviously, like, you don't have to do as much. But in order to achieve those HERS limits, there's a 52 that would be required if it's mixed fuel and not using any electric equipment for space heating or have solar on site. But you do get a 2-point buffer for adding in additional measures like, I think it's 2 points for, it might be 2 or
Renewable
3.
heat.
Yeah, sorry, it's 3 points that you get if you have renewable space heating, an additional 3 points if you add in a solar PV system of 4 kilowatts. So that requirement from a 52, if it's mixed fuel, can go up to a 58 if it has electric space heating and a solar on site. So that's one note. But when it comes to achieving that for a HERS rating, it's typically a combination of measures, possibly, and this is, again, only required for additions and alterations over 1,000 square feet or exceeding 100% of the existing area. Measures like air sealing could be a big opportunity if you open up the walls, bringing the insulation in those walls up to the prescriptive code values, potentially mechanical equipment. And there are opportunities within the HERS index that do provide flexibility in terms of the measures you can do. So you can kind of pick, typically it's something you work with the rater to determine what measures work best for your building. I describe the HERS rater as a coach of some sort. So they're there to provide you with options and to provide flexibility to give you a sense of what you would need to do to comply with the requirements. So it's something where it could be a combination of things to meet that HERS 52. There are additional pieces of it that you have to consider that would be added for it. So might be more efficient equipment, might be more efficient or more insulation, and things like that. So yeah, so when you're doing that, undergoing that renovation project, which could be a gut renovation as we mentioned, it's essentially bringing it to meet those minimum efficiency requirements, and the rater can sort of be flexible with you, working with you at the different stages to give you a sense of like what would work better, what'll, like, they could give you options like if you reduce your or increase your window efficiency, increase your insulation, increase your mechanical equipment, you might get a HERS this based on plans. But if you do these measures, maybe you'll get a lower score. And it's working with them as sort of a consultant. And typically the builder will work with them to give specific information there. So I hope that answers your question. And I'm happy to dive into more detail if you have additional questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
Was it, oh, okay, so did you say that the legislator, it's not until 2050 that we have to be zero emissions?
So
Sorry.
this was the Climate Act of 2021 that was passed by the Baker administration. It provides a legal mandate for the state, for the Commonwealth, to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. I don't know who is going to penalize us if we don't. High sea level, probably. And it does also set, interim targets for 2030 and for 2040.
Are the 2030 and 2040 year required, or is it just the 2050 zero emissions, like, for the less than 50% for 2030? Is that required, or is that just like a benchmark that they're setting?
These are benchmarks. They're
Okay.
like, aspirational goals that the Climate Act essentially provides a framework for which we can move toward. So by getting to net zero is going to be difficult. That's why we do have these interim targets to kind of guide us to where we need to go. And this essentially provides us with the basis for what we can do. So, with the legislature has come up with a lot of laws and policies for example, offshore wind that help guide the state to achieving cleaner emissions. That's why we have the specialized stretch code, because it helps decarbonize our buildings. That's why we have a lot of incentives or other policies that help drive electric vehicles or public transport, hopefully. So this essentially is an overarching framework for how we do achieve, net zero by 2050 with those interim targets. But again, there's the biggest kind of deterrent for not doing this is climate change. And so that's kind of what's driving the Commonwealth right now.
Okay. So if it's not required until 2050, right, is what you're saying, outside of these benchmarks or framework, that I have trouble with the fact that homeowners would be under this, would be required to prepare for that when that's 25 years out. And I know there's a cost savings to doing it, when you're doing the build, But I feel like that should be the homeowner's decision if they want to save the money and do that, or wait until, perhaps it would be, more expensive for the homeowner, but I feel like that should be the homeowner's choice.
Yeah, of course, and you're free to vote as you wish. But
Sure.
the reason why it's better to do things earlier is we can't. It's very difficult to go from like 60 to 0 in a matter of 5 years if we were to do this in 2045, for example. It's much easier to go from 60 to 0 in 25 years because it provides us with a much more gradual approach. The more we kind of delay, the harder it becomes. And we are seeing there's going to be growth in the Commonwealth. I know there's a lot of talk about, high cost of living and people being driven out of the state. But there's a lot of jobs here. People are going to be moving in here. There's going to be a lot more housing here. And it's essential for those houses to be built as efficiently as possible, because if not, then those are missed opportunities for every house that we don't get. And it just helps us shave off that extra bit of CO2 that is required to get us to net zero, because with every additional year that we wait is one additional year of building stock that isn't as good as it needs to be.
Thank you.
Just add one more thing too. You mentioned choice, that's a concern. And for the specialized stretch code, the homeowner or the builder does have a choice, right? So they could choose to build a mixed fuel building in a new building, but they would be required to take on additional measures to try to lower the carbon impact of that building from the fossil fuel. That's the idea. So you do have a choice. It may cost you a little bit more. It may be a little bit more time-consuming, but you do have a choice. So I just want to make it clear that you're not forced to not put in a gas heating system if you don't want to.
Oh, but I mean, if you, I see. You're saying the choice would be about gas, including gas in your home, or just having it all electric. Okay. Correct. But if you went with gas, you would be required to do so. Okay. Correct. sorry, one more regarding the schools. Did you say MSBA?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The town does, correct me if I'm wrong again, but from what I believe, this town doesn't have to adopt the specialized stretch code in order for the school to comply with it. So if the town doesn't opt in, the schools could still move forward with that, those requirements for the specialized stretch code.
So that's an ambiguity that I hope MSBA will correct. I think this was actually asked in the tri-board meeting a few weeks ago. I think from the literal reading, of what they have, I would say that you are correct. However, it stands to reason that if a school, hypothetically speaking, were built all electric, then it already complies with the stretch code, and then by default, it would comply with the specialized stretch code, if and only if the town votes to adopt the code writ large. The only way I would see a school getting the extra MSBA incentive would be if the town did not vote to adopt the specialized stretch code and did a mixed fuel building and just happened to want to do that additional solar. So it's very nuanced and it's quite ambiguous, but I'm hoping that MSBA will kind of clarify that.
Okay. I will look into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the existing exemption for the historic homes again. The part where you're an architect's allowed to describe what's preserved, not what's important on the preservation of the house. I won't tell you the local building inspector because there's been so many so far. We had a project, local town, very large project. It was phased out for over many years, and so the new code came out, and the local building inspector said, "Hey, Matt, you got to come in. I don't think you can put these windows in the house right here." I said, "Well, geez, it's approved by the local historic commission." And so the thing is that it's only the thing, so the building inspector called Doer. We called Doer together, and I don't know who we spoke to, but the point is that if you've got 4 beautiful wood windows in a row, and you've got a vinyl window, and you want to take the vinyl window out because the local historic commission says you have to put the wood window in, it doesn't meet the energy code. You can't put an inefficient wood window next to those other 5 windows. Mm-hmm. You have to have a triple pane, whatever double pane window looks completely different than the other ones, which also means now you're not going to get a vote from the local historic commission to be able to do your project. So that vinyl window, whatever it is that's falling apart, just sort of kind of stays there. So I think, and I'm going to say it again, is that the BBRS had a 6-month period where they sat down with builders and architects. I know you guys had a Zoom meeting. That's great. But when they changed the code from the simple Massachusetts code to the big building code book, I was one of the people who sat down with them. And within 6 weeks, we cleared up a dozen things. You can get more efficient existing homes and reduce the carbon significantly if you sat down with us. So what's going on right now is 1/3 to half of the people are not doing projects at all. They just can't. Or they're just lying and cheating, getting around it. Even the building inspectors. Just as a few stats. There's one developer, his name was Campanelli, and he built about 20,000 slabs on grade. Little houses, 800,000 square feet. You add a little addition to it, again, 2 stories or whatever, 500 square feet, because you only got an 800 square foot house, that turns into 1,000 square feet. And you know, Mike, if you have a 7'2" ceiling and you can't meet that building height, ceiling height, you can't insulate the floor, there's no way you're going to meet the code. There's no way to run the ductwork. So the option is either tear the house down or don't do the project. That's like 15,000, 20,000 houses in Massachusetts. All you have to do is sit down and meet with us, and then that house type will be insulated better, reduce the carbon significantly. So it doesn't take a lot of effort. It's just a matter of sitting down with the people who are programmatic, and we all have the same goals, right? And that's all we're asking. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to give me your card after Do you have a card? If you would like to give that to me after the presentation.
Yes, thank
Okay, thank you.
you. Good evening. My name is Ben Fierro. I live here in Ipswich. And just for full disclosure, I know Ian Finlayson,
Oh, yeah.
the folks at the department, because in my practice I represent the home building industry. I'm not here speaking for them. They're not paying me to be here, but I'm here because I'm familiar with this issue, the promulgation of the excuse me, first stretch energy code. So I do have a couple of questions. One, it's my understanding. Oh,
I'm sorry. Just can I ask you if you have questions, just so we don't confuse the audience, if you have questions that relate specifically to the specialized stretch code, if you could hit those first.
Yep.
And then if you have others that relate to the stretch code, hit those second.
Sure.
That's
Great.
okay.
Thank you. Of course, Carl. Regarding the specialized stretch energy code, my understanding is that the department essentially estimates that there's going to be no additional cost. Here I'm speaking on the residential side, impact on new home construction. Is that correct?
We don't have any cost estimates
You don't?
that we've put out with regard to the specialized energy code. Again, it is quite a new code.
Right.
There are two things I can unequivocally say is that with an all-electric building, then the cost difference is zero because the requirements are the same. With the mixed fuel house, you do have the additional upfront cost of the pre-wiring and the solar if you choose to buy it outright.
Right. On the mixed fuel, let me just clarify this because I said something in another meeting and there was some confusion. If I was to build a new house today under the specialized stretch energy code, if it was adopted here in Ipswich, and I heated the home with a heat pump, but then I also had a gas stove and a gas fireplace because my wife likes to cook with gas, would that be considered a mixed fuel home?
Yes.
Yes.
It's heating, cooking,
Right.
and
Clothes drying and water heating.
Yeah, okay. And so then those additional costs would come into play that you were speaking to.
yeah.
That would include a secondary panel, electrical panel, and an additional
It depends.
for the EV charging?
It depends. Well, I mean, you don't need an EV. Well,
You have
that's
to
your choice if
pre-wire
you want to
for-
get an EV charger. Like it really depends if you want to do a panel upgrade on the size of your house. Like it's very easy to do all electric on like a 200 amp panel.
And does the department have any costs on that?
On upgrading to a 400 amp? No, we do not.
Oh, okay.
But I think there's a tax credit for that, and I think we'll be rolling out a rebate for the MLP for that at some point.
Again, going back to residential construction, are you familiar with the report that was issued by MIT and Wentworth, the
Yeah.
joint study,
Yeah.
which was funded in part by the home building industry? It was also funded by nonprofit organizations, banks, heat pump suppliers, and a diverse group of interests on that report. So the department's had a chance to review that report?
Yeah, individuals within DOE all have had a chance to review of that report, and we've also seen the rebuttals put forward by other individuals within MIT Wentworth.
So that you know that report estimates for the average cost of a moderately priced single-family home would add approximately $23,000 to the cost of a new single-family home and about 1.8% on multifamily housing. And I raise that now, and I know some of the rebuttals have been that the report done by MIT and Wentworth, which was an independent study, and their study was based upon real-world bids from subcontractors, in terms of, here's specs on a house, give us, your quotes on that. I know one of the criticisms, or not criticisms, but one of the points of differentiation was that the report done by MIT presumed heat pump, air source heat pump, but a ducted system, not a ductless system. You go with a ducted system, yes, there's additional cost for the ductwork and the insulating the ducts. The reason, of course, that this study shows that was because most homeowners today prefer, obviously, they're familiar with a warm air type system with the ducts, and what the builders are finding is that most consumers, unless you're putting an addition on a home or you're doing a vacation cabin or something like that, don't want those ducted systems in the walls throughout the house. So that's part of the cost differential. The other part of it was a criticism that it didn't consider the rebates. But the problem is rebates today, of which are not permanent, in terms of investment decisions by developers, in terms of what they're going to build. And the timeline for building can be anywhere in terms of permitting and financing, anywhere from 3 to 7 years. The lack of assurance that those rebates are permanent, really can't be accounted for when you're doing your pro formas. So that's some of the areas of difference. Real world, on the ground, Massachusetts bids, the difference in the types of systems. And those are real costs. And again, as I've said before, if here in Ipswich we choose to accept those costs for the benefits, then that's fine. But I think there's some real costs there. One last technical thing. Since the specialized code is promulgated by the DOER and not by the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, there is no appeal opportunity if there's a dispute between a builder, contractor, architect with the local building inspector to any body. Because the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, and I presume you know this, has an appeals board, right? When there's a conflict, a difference of interpretation, because that's based upon the code promulgated by the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, you have an appeal. Given this code is promulgated by the department, the BBRS has no statutory authority to hear appeals. And that's a real issue. That's a problem here. So I appreciate you coming tonight, and thank you for your response.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that, I might be wrong with this, but I believe that there might be an option for projects that undergo the stretch code to appeal to the BBRS. I know statutorily they are different, but I do think at this point, if there are questions about the stretch code, they can appeal to the BBRS.
Just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
Are you speaking to the most recent iteration of the stretch code promulgated by the DOER, the one that became effective January 1, 2023?
So I believe there were discussions within the BBRS relating to having an energy specialist on the on that appeals board, I believe. I don't know what came of that in discussions, but I know that there have been those that, and yeah, I think it is something where there is that conflict a little bit between the BBRS and the DOER in terms of the authority, but I think there might still be an option to appeal to the BBRS, but I have to clarify that. I don't have a specific.
I would also have to clarify that within DOER. It's my understanding that until DOER does have an appeals process in place, we just don't have the the regulatory the kind of the personnel for that yet.
Well, it's a matter of both staffing and statutory authority. I get that.
Well, until that happens, it's my assumption. I think it's under DOER's assumption that BBRS still has the final say on appeals.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at there. So thanks for the clarification.
I'm not aware of any builder or contractor who's been able to do that, but we'll see. On the specialized code, how many communities now have adopted? Is it 31? Or?
It's 34, and then Newburyport will be the 35th once that gets promulgated.
And what kind of training has the department done for local building inspectors on this? This is a sea change, as you know, for building inspectors who, again, have to both interpret and then enforce this new code.
We actually had one this morning.
Yeah, that's a great question. So through the Mass Save program, there are a lot of really great opportunities for building officials and building inspectors. So I was with Dylan this morning. I got up at 7 a.m. to run that training in Medford. We talked about the specific requirements for the commercial code, but generally we do have trainings available, both in-person sessions that happen across the state, as well as webinars that happen a few times a week with different topics relating to the code that building inspectors can go to. There's also a technical support hotline, phone number and email that anyone can reach out to with technical questions about the code. I do have a copy of that here on my card if you guys want to take that. But yeah, there are, and those hotlines are more just like code advice from the technical resource. They're not talking about code interpretation specifically, but what they'll say is, this is what we think the requirements are, and we can provide best guess types of things there. So yeah, so there are a lot of really great training opportunities provided through the Mass Save technical support program for both residential and commercial codes. They cover a wide array of topics across the different areas, and they are available for building officials.
and I'm sorry, I don't mean to monopolize you, but you did mention the commercial side. I asked about cost impact on the residential side. Has the department come up with any analysis as to what the specialized stretch code impact would be on new commercial, industrial, as well as obviously municipal buildings?
So residential, commercial, and municipal buildings?
No, I was asking specifically now about commercial, because of course so the impact of the specialized code on commercial, industrial, and similar.
Oh, okay, I see. We have not yet. We're still gathering data for that.
Okay.
So the specialized stretch code became effective in 4 communities last July,
Right.
and another 14 last January. So we just don't have enough data for that. I can tell you anecdotally that there's one developer who's been doing commercial work and then multifamily work, so passive house, in the greater Boston area. They're seeing like and this is, I just want to clarify, this is this is taking inflation into account and the cost of financing so that all of that is separate. They're seeing a cost premium of about 3 to 5% from going from stretch to specialized, both commercial and multifamily passive house buildings.
Okay. Thank you.
Before incentives, but I know ELD has different incentives.
Yeah, and if you're working as a home builder or as a code official that's working on this, we are happy to provide a link to those training opportunities. We're happy to schedule them if any particular area wants the particular training for code officials. That is provided through the program. So I'm happy to give my card after if you want to touch base. Thanks.
Yeah. So on that question, do you happen to have your contact in the slides?
It's not on this, the latest slides that I had sent to you, but there is a list of resources which...
Okay, maybe leave that.
we should really try QR codes next time.
Okay, but we'll figure out a way. You're happy to have people that have further questions contact either one of you?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll figure out how to get your contact out to those watching or those that attended tonight. Okay, any other questions before we close? Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope this was productive.
Yeah, thank you all for your
Thank you
time.
very
Take
much.
care.